We have a quorum is present, and Matt, are we waiting for anybody from staff? You don't have Latasha tonight, right?
No. I would ask Keith if he might promote Caitlin Conway to a panelist, and somewhere Gwen Newsom might be dialed in as well. So if he could look for them, I think that would round out the staff complement. Thank you.
All right. Okay, well, then we'll call the meeting to order. This is the Board of Directors meeting of the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority for Thursday, April 22nd, 2021. As we stated, we do have a quorum present, so we'll begin. Item number one is to approve our agenda. Is there any? Matt, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you're amenable, I'd like to reverse the order of items 4.2 and 4.3. On discussion with Brian and Forrest, we thought it might be better for Forrest to go first and Brian to back cleanup.
Okay. Raise your hand if you have an objection to that. If not, I'll ask somebody to move the agenda. Sue, seconded by Kathleen. All right. We have an amended board today, so I'll just go through based on who I usually go alphabetically, but I'll go just based on the names I see. Matt?
I'm sorry, quick reminder, this is the first meeting where our board members also need to state their location.
That's right. State the city that you are calling in, zooming in from today. So when I call on you for yes, no approval of the state your name and the city that you are dialing in from, if you wouldn't mind. So the first one I see on my screen is Roger Hewitt. Yes or no for the agenda?
Yes for the agenda, and I am in Ann Arbor.
Okay. Sue Gott?
Yes, and I'm in Ann Arbor.
Okay. Mike Alamain?
I have the same boring answer as my predecessors. I'm in Ann Arbor, and it is yes.
Okay. Kathleen?
Yes, and I'm also calling in from Ann Arbor.
Ryan?
Yes, and for variety, I'm calling in from Ypsi Township.
And Jesse Miller?
Yes, and I am in Ypsilanti, Michigan.
And Rich Chang, where are you at?
Yes, and calling in for variety from Pittsfield Township.
Okay. Very good. That's moved into the record. Thank you. Well, then we'll move to item 1.2, which is public comment. Anybody can talk to the board or address the board on any item on our agenda for up to 3 minutes. Please hit the raise hand icon, or I think it's *9 if you want to alert Keith Book that you would like to address the board this evening. And again, you'll have up to 3 minutes. Please state your name for the record. And Keith, do we have anybody this evening?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Chairman Mahler. We have Robert Pulowski. Mr. Pulowski, you've been unmuted.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you guys are staying safe, staying well. Four things I got for you guys. First thing I'd like to start off with is the fare structure. So I want to bring up a couple things, and I'd like to see if you guys could fix that. So you guys currently offer 7-day, 31-day, and day passes currently. Now, I'd like to also bring to mind if you guys would also consider putting 7-day passes on the, if you guys would consider putting selling 7-day passes instead of having, you know, the day passes where you got to constantly purchase a day pass if you don't want to spend the 31 to get the 31-day pass. It's easier to have the 7-day pass as an option to make it easier for passengers if they don't ride transit more than 31 days. So 7 days, I think, really needs to be a seller on if you guys are going to sell more passes. I really think that should be an option. Also, value passes, if you guys would ever consider putting value passes as a seller too. I think those would be a great seller after the pandemic gets over with, and maybe, you know, they'd probably be probably a big seller for people that don't want to buy the 7-day or the 31-day passes. Also, it'd be great if you guys could also put like Smart has 4-hour transfer cards where you could transfer from one bus to the other for 4 hours. Would it be, an option if you guys would have, if buses could issue 4-hour transfer cards, transfer from any other route, including the same route on AATA buses? You pay for your fare, and you ask for a transfer, and they issue you a 4-hour transfer instead of paying that 25 cents to pay for or whatever to get a transfer to another bus, and then you got to do the same thing over and over. We could, the 4-hour transfer cards, you pay for your fare, they issue a 4-hour transfer. That will save a lot of headache, and it'll cost less for passengers if you guys did that and issued them on the bus. I think that'd be a big jump start. Other than the fare thing, because I have like 3 things on here regarding fares. The last thing, articulated buses. I think I brought this back up. I think it was, I would say last year or January sometime. I'm not sure, but do you guys have plans to start up, getting those articulated buses in the system, getting them into AATA, to have that, those small buses on those big routes gone? Because I know there's some congestion on Washtenaw, Ellsworth, and some other routes during the peak hours. And I think some articulated buses would be good for the system, especially, peak hours like on Washtenaw, Ellsworth, and, especially with the August service changes, those would be good too, to have those articulated buses too, especially during peak hours. Really would like you guys to consider that, especially the fares and the articulated buses, because the buses, actually, I'm really asking a lot from you guys to consider, because Smart's the same way. They're slowing, they're taking their time getting the articulated buses, but I think you guys can get them in sooner than them, which I think, that'd be great. But though the fares and the buses, I want you to take a look at. And also one more question. I can't find the agenda for today's meeting. Is there a way you guys could get that agenda posted earlier next time for the next meeting? Because I can't find it anywhere for today's meeting. Those are my questions and comments. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week and weekend as well. Take care, you guys. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments, and our agenda should be posted on the RIDE website. All right, Keith, do we have anybody else who wants to address the board this evening?
No, we do not.
Okay. We'll close the public meeting then, public comment period then, and move on to 1.3 general announcements. 131, this is going to be the farewell swan song of our longest tenured board member, Sue Gott. Will be stepping off the board. This will be her last meeting. Sue started on the board in 2012, I believe, and served on the governance committee and served as the chair of what is now the service committee. And for my money, she has been a tireless advocate for continuous improvement and better processes and fiduciary responsibility, and a real champion of regional leadership and new ideas and equal mobility access and so many other things. And we are better off as a community and as an organization because Sue was a part of our board. And I think that is indisputable. So thank you for your service and leadership, Sue. It's been a real pleasure to work with you and to have you. And I know that we, as the RIDE, gave you some trinkets and goodies. And if you wouldn't mind, I think those are in the background behind you so everybody can see that.
Sure.
We would like to unveil those at this time.
Well, I have to say these flowers are beautiful. And I pulled the paper apart a little bit, but I've not opened them yet. Let's see. So this is a beautiful bouquet of flowers. And I noticed kind of a red, white, and blue patriotic theme here. So also kind of picks up on the RIDE's colors, I thought, at the same time, especially with you know, these different colored blues, which, as we all know, we pay attention to the color on our buses. So thank you for that. They're beautiful. And there was a card that came with that said, "Dear Sue, thank you for your service and dedication to the ride from the board of directors and the staff." So how generous of all of you. Thank you so much. And then I also have this. I have a feeling this might be Keith's touch. I have a forever laminated section of the board agenda with my name on it. Keith, is that your touch?
Maybe.
Well done. I will hold on to that. That's really terrific. So this is quite intriguing because it's a lot flatter than that bus mailbox that used to come to some of the former board members.
Either that or we made it a DIY kit.
I beg your pardon?
Said either that or we made it a DIY kit. You have to make it yourself. We just gave you
That's kind of what I was wondering.
Some assembly
we just gave you the
required.
sheet metal and the screws.
The IKEA mailbox.
Oh, wow, look at that. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I think I'll have to put this up on my front porch for a while.
Mhm.
Well, that is so generous. And you know, I have to say, I have treasured working on this board. And Eric, thank you for your very kind and generous words. You know, it is wonderful to work alongside people who are equally committed and passionate about the work that we do. And I have just felt it was, you know, a privilege not only to represent Ann Arbor, but also to represent the university. And as a practitioner in planning, so much of the work that we do is, you know, building community in Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti and in the region and connecting to Detroit. And it's just, it's all purposeful. And I really want to acknowledge how much I've appreciated the people who have spoken to us from the public. It's been one of the things that has really stuck with me is the time and effort people put to come to our meetings, to speak to us. And I know, like all of you, I've listened closely and I've learned a lot. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for these generous gifts. And I know, Matt, I'll just be continuing to meet with you in a different capacity. And our paths will all cross, but thank you for the opportunity. And I do continue to hope that all those things, Eric, you described will continue. And I know we've got such a talented staff and a diligent and committed board. So you're all just a real pleasure to work with.
Thank you, Sue. Other board members, feel free to give your thoughts or comments at this time. You want to jump in? Go ahead, Roger.
Well, Sue and I go back actually much farther than just the AATA board, and not sure quite how far back, but the beginning of the connector study, which well, at least a dozen years ago. So I don't know. I'm going to be continuing working with transportation without you around, Sue.
I'm around and I'll be working on transportation. You just won't see me at a board meeting, and the connector is still, you know, if you've read our PCCN report, the connector is still a huge interest and certainly something I care deeply about seeing advanced. So plenty of opportunities.
So I will certainly miss you on the board. It's been a pleasure working with you.
Yeah, you too, Roger. I think we've done a few schemes over lunch, little drawings and a few little noodlings of ideas. So
Here instead of there.
Yeah.
good teamwork.
Wow. Good to work with you. Thanks, Lou.
Jesse, are you unmuted? I can't tell. One of you's muted, one of you's not. I can't. One of you is. But Kathleen, go ahead.
Sue, I just wanted to say what an absolute pleasure it has been to know you. From my first moment on the board just a few years ago, you were so welcoming and open and encouraging, and have been, maybe unbeknownst to you, a mentor to me. I've really listened to what you have to say and how you approach matters, the way that you conduct yourself as a board member, and the way that you share your thoughts and your ideas. It's given me a lot of opportunity to look at ways to improve myself. So I want to thank you for all of that, and I'm going to sorely miss you, and I wish you well on your new endeavors.
Thank you. It's been mutual, Kathleen. So right back at you. I felt the same way, and you know how fortunate we are, not only to have the privilege of doing the work that we're doing and representing our various owners, but also to work alongside people who we admire and respect and who bring so much talent to the table. So I've learned a lot from you as well.
And Sue, I
Thanks, Kathleen.
already had the opportunity to tell you how much I will personally miss you, but I didn't say how much I've appreciated you and what you could do for our board. I really, every board meeting, you had very, very positive influence on what we do. I don't think in the 6 years that I've been on the board that I ever had the pleasure of being on the same committee as you.
True.
I also want to say you can always still come to the public part of the meeting. There's nothing that will
Thank
prevent
you.
you from doing
I'm
that. So
able to do
we'll remember you, and I'm sure you'll remember us. It's been
that.
great.
Thank you much.
Okay, go ahead, Jesse. You have your hand up.
So this is why I had my video off. I forgot that I have my cheeky work background up. Pardon me. It's going to be very different without you. I'm very much going to miss you. When I first joined the board, I was talking with my predecessor Jillian, and I said, well, who can I go to for questions? If I don't know what's going on, and she said, talk to Sue. And you were there to answer my questions. I remember meeting with you in your office and having a really great long conversation. I imagine we're not longer than you had probably intended, but it was just so helpful. And thinking about some of the real deep policy discussions that we've had. I think about like the construction policy or the capital policy. Like your insight was just invaluable, and it's not going to be the same without your knowledge and experience and your demeanor here. I'm very much going to miss you, but I'm very glad that I got to serve on the board with you. So thank you very much, and I wish you all the best.
Thanks. Well, it is fantastic with you and Ryan representing Ypsilanti. I don't know if everyone knows, but I worked as a community and economic development director for the city of Ypsilanti in the mid 80s. And so, of course, was involved in the YTC from the Ypsilanti perspective. So a little hidden reason why I always have been prodding a little extra harder to get us to work on upgrading YTC. I think the region is stronger for the synergy between Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, and the surrounding communities. And I very much, Jesse, appreciate your advocacy and your stewardship. And I know that will continue. And my dog thinks so too, in case anyone can't tell. She just kind of wanted to get on TV while she got the chance.
Good. Anyone else? Rich, are you off mute? I can't tell. I think it looks like you're off.
I'd actually like to. So I think I am the newest board member, but even in my short time, actually, I think my first board meeting, Sue, you did a presentation about UM's transportation, I think some expansion plans, and it's kind of extremely informative. So it's for me, it's a bummer because we're going to lose a lot of institutional knowledge and expertise. But one of the things I really enjoyed the most is frankly the questions that you ask. Every time you ask, I'm like, that's something I wish I had thought of. So kudos to you with the effort and time that you've given to the IIITA and the community, and thank you for inspiring me to be better with my questions and my critical thinking around these issues, especially around in regards to transportation.
Well, I'm glad you found my questions to be positive. Thank you.
Anyone else want to jump in? All right. Okay. Do we have any other general announcements? And Sue, we wish you again the best, and please stay around. Please keep us in check. That's what we really
Will
want.
do.
Matt, go ahead.
I'd also just like to say thank you to Sue. It was nice to see a familiar face coming back into town, and I've learned a great deal from her since getting back. And one just general comment, the board packet was posted on our website on Friday. It can be found under the leadership section. Then there's the board section, and under that is a drop-down menu for board documents and meeting agendas, and it can be found there.
Thank you. All right. So we'll move on then to section 2, the consent agenda. We have minutes in our packet and then the committee meeting reports. Can I have somebody move the consent agenda into the record? Mike, seconded by
Ryan.
Ryan. All right, we'll just go through again according to my screen here. Yes or no for the consent agenda. Roger? That's a yes. Sue?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
All right. So that that's approved unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on then to section 3, policy monitoring and development. 3.1, committee meeting discussion. Are there any questions or comments about any of the committee meeting reports? Okay. Not seeing any, then we'll move on to 3.2, which is the ownership linkage task force. And this will be a verbal report out from Mike Alamein. Mike?
Okay. Most of the people on the board, with I think maybe 2 exceptions, were around when we initially had the first ownership linkage task force, which is back, I think it was late 2018. And for, again, just a little bit more background, ownership linkage is an essential part of policy governance. If you go read all the materials on policy governance, you will certainly see that is a prominent part. Let me just, intention today is just to give some background on ownership linkage and what's been done in the past, and kind of tee up what we want to do in the future. And basically, our plan from the task force, the current task force is to tee it up a little bit to this month and hopefully get into more detailed discussion of this at our board meeting in May, and perhaps even debate some points that the task force has agreed on, and certainly want to get the input of the board and maybe even vote on some things. Just to kind of clarify things, my definition of ownership linkage really has to do with the board engaging more directly with who we consider its owners. And that's to promote two-way communication. And this dialogue should have a long-term perspective and focus on ends policy, and see that the ride's objectives align with those that we consider owners. And what we decided is, as the task force, were our owners. First of all, there's legal owners and moral owners as defined in policy governance. And let me say that we had a lot of guidance from Rose Mercier on this, both the original task force and the reconstituted task force. And let me also mention who's on the new task force. I'm the chair of this task force. We have Kyra, we have Jesse, we have Rich, and I don't think I'm forgetting. Yeah, I think that's it. So those, and we've had several meetings since going back into January, I guess it is. And I hope you've had a chance to look at what's in the board package. It gives some background on that. First of all, let me define who we see as our owners. First of all, there's our legal owners, those being the city of Ann Arbor, city of Ypsilanti, and the Ypsilanti Township. Now, technically, according to, you won't find a deed to the shares of TheRide. So it's not ownership in the traditional way you see ownership, legal ownership, that is. But those three entities are parties to our articles of incorporation. Our articles of incorporation really give us legal right to exist. Of course, those three bodies also appoint the board of directors. So it's fairly clear that they would be what we would consider the legal owners. The moral owners are those, and we've talked about this a lot within the committee, and we can talk about it more next month if you want to get into that. But those are the residents and workers of those three entities, plus the entities that we have purchase and service agreements with. And those would be our moral owners. You'll see in the package our outline of where we think we should be going on ownership linkage and what steps we should be taking. I'll mention, after the first ownership linkage task force, we did have 3 meetings, one with each legal owner. And I think those were pretty positive. We intended to follow those up with the second meeting with those 3 legal owners to get into our ends and have a discussion about ends and see that see what the input would be from those legal owners. We didn't at that time have the revised ends, and it took a while for those to be finalized and developed, and there were delays because of that, and then the pandemic came along, and so nothing really has happened other than we reconstituted the task force in January and have had several meetings. In the documents you find in the board package are some of the results of that, and trying to look forward to our next meeting. And I think that's really all I have to say right now. If anybody on the board wants to bring anything up now, that's fine. Jesse is here. Rich is here from the task force too. So if they want to add anything, that would be good. Or you can ask any questions or make any observations you want.
Any
Okay.
questions for Mike or the other committee members?
Okay, we will be back next month for some more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, and thank you for your work on this very important linker task force. We really appreciate your leadership and the service of Kyra, Jesse, and Rich as well. So thank you all. Next, if there's no questions, we'll move on to monitoring 3.0 to 3.8. This was a large survey and large report in our packet. Very interesting results. We can go through this. Appreciate we might indulge ourselves for a little bit of time. And I'll just start and we'll go through this one at a time. So I want to, I was thinking about a way to try to do this efficiently, kind of on an economical basis to do it, but I want to give everybody a chance where they feel the need or the desire to make comments on any particular section that we voted on to do so. So I'll just kind of go through these one at a time and not read every one of the policies and not read every one of the results of the voting, but just address them one at a time mostly and see if people have any comments or feedback they want to provide themselves. So we'll start, which is I think on page 27 of the packet. The first one is 3.0, the global governance process. You see the results there with some comments at the bottom. An interesting elaborate comment about TheRide. And so somebody, if whoever wrote that wants to bring that up now, we can talk about that. Or if you want to save that for another time in one of the service committees or something like that, we can save that for another time as well. But an interesting, deep concern about the elimination of the TheRide service there. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Kathleen.
I think that was me. Probably not a surprise to Mr. Carpenter. I've been very vocal these last couple of weeks. I don't think it needs.
It's not a surprise to any of us, Kathleen, which is fine.
I don't know that we need to discuss it now. I know that I've had some conversation with Mr. Smith has contacted me and we had a conversation earlier this week, and I think it may come up during his presentation. So I don't know that it needs to be belabored at this point.
Thank you for making the comment and submitting that. And that's fine. We can discuss or get to it or more in depth into it when we get to Brian's part later on. On the next page is 3.1, the governing style. I won't read it again out loud for the interest of time. Any comments or questions about governance style? I may go from time to time, and I'm not, obviously these are, we don't have the results of who voted where or what, but you know, given the wording of the language here, if you were the one person who voted some of the time, I would be interested to know if you know, when we aren't doing this, you know, why it's only some of the time. You don't have to jump up and take accountability for the vote if you don't want to, but I would just be interested if somebody wants to email me at a later point, whoever voted some of the time for this, I would be interested in hearing more thoughts about that. Any other comments on that one? You'll have to shout out because given the screen thing, I can only see a few people right now, and I can only see two other board members, which are Mike and Kathleen. So let me see if I can. Okay, now I got more people there. Okay, now I can see everybody but Rich. All right, moving on then to 3.1 and 3.2. We had an even split with 3.1.2 about encouraging diversity of viewpoints. We say most of the time, half the people said most of the time, half said always. Again, if anybody cares to elaborate on that, or they want to, you know, email me or have a discussion about it, happy to have that. 3.1.3 about directing and controlling the organization through careful establishment of board written policies through values and perspectives. We had one person who only voted some of the time, and I'd be curious as to why somebody said we only do that some of the time. I think this is kind of the way we drive every single agenda, but for the one person who voted we only do this some of the time, I'd be interested in your thoughts on why we only do that some of the time. And by the way, if anybody felt that any of these questions or the policies, they were difficult to answer because of the way they were worded, I'd be interested in your thoughts about that as well. All right, moving on then to 313. Here we had a pretty good split. Half of the people said most of the time. A couple of people, 3 people said some of the time. One person said always, which is we ask ourselves those kind of questions there. Any comments about that one? And again, just feel free to jump in.
Say that, like,
Go
I
ahead.
think that we've talked at points about trying to be explicit about those. And I'm guessing that's probably why there's such a diversity of opinion here, that maybe there's a sense that we maybe in our hearts are addressing those concerns, but we never really explicitly call these out. And again, I've heard this, the conversation has, been started a couple of times, but we've never really come up with any sort of resolution on whether we need to talk about whether we need to address those particular things.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was probably one of the ones who voted some of the time myself, and I think it's occasional when we get kind of lost in the weeds about a policy or something else, we kind of back up and say, all right, let's ask ourselves. I think we've done that once or twice, but I think Jesse, you're absolutely right. I don't know that we start every policy discussion or everything with, all right, let's pose these 3 questions. Let's all look at them, and then let's all go through them one at a time. I think you're right. I think they form the conceptual philosophical foundation of our discussions, but we don't often state them, even though we have them in the packet up front usually.
And I think that I saw that the governance committee had kind of talked about this, that it might be an issue with, like, we don't really have interpretations of these policies, and that some of us are interpreting it differently than others.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's it.
Okay. Oh, that's fair. All right, any other comments on that one? All right, 314. We have again a pretty even split there. 3, 3, and 2. That might be to Jesse's point, differences in how we interpret the policy itself, or what we mean by strategic leadership or other things. But anybody want to comment about this one per se? Okay, Roger, go ahead.
I just say that I think we haven't really reviewed ends in a while, and I guess I have some feeling that we would probably need to be a little more specific. But I don't want to get into details on it.
Yeah.
I have a comment on that, Eric. Roger, were you done? Did I? Okay. You're asking about 314?
Right.
So just food for thought. Matt's done such a good job of trying to talk and focus on us on long-range planning. But the question for me is always, are we continuing to do long-range planning? And each year we're planning the next year forward, and we're continuing to kind of update. But looking back at where we were and kind of revisiting a long span of time, I'm not sure. When I saw the split, it occurs to me that we might see long-range planning slightly differently. And so back to the point about interpretations, because the long-range plan is a little different than long-range planning. And to have something be long-range, you have to know what near term is and be able to compare it with where you were. So it's kind of a continuum of planning, but knowing kind of the yardstick and where you are, I think it's an opportunity for clarity moving forward. So I just interpret the split as maybe people seeing that differently, even though I think, Matt, you've done as good of a job as you possibly could do to try to bring clarity. But I think that might still be an opportunity for continued board focus.
Oh, good point. Thank you, Sue. Anybody else? All right. 315, the discipline needed to govern ourselves with excellence, etc. We got 5 most of the times and 3 all the times. Any comments on that one? Moving on to 316, continuous board development, a little bit of a split there, but the majority of people said most of the time we do this in terms of board development and new board members, process, etc. Any comments on that one? Okay. 317, we had one outlier who said most of the time. Everybody else said all the time, that we kind of don't use anybody, will allow no officer to hinder us or be an excuse for not fulfilling governance commitments. I think we're pretty aligned on that. Any questions, comments on that? 318, we'll monitor our processes and performance. We have 5 people who said, 5 respondents who said most of the time, 2 who said all the time, 1 who said some of the time. And certainly we all realized we had to adjust this past year. We kind of did some things out of order, some things didn't make sense, just given the extraordinary circumstances that we went through over 2020 and even into 2021 now. So any other comments, recognizing that that was kind of a unique and special year, but any other comments on 318? Okay. We got a few comments at the end then of that section. One person said, I think to Jesse's comment, have we really stated those questions out loud? 311, somebody mentioned that we should become better at self-identifying policy issues. Appreciate that we're given suggestions from the CEO and policy matters, and strive to improve the board's ability to identify its policy visions. If whoever made that wants to elaborate, feel free, or not, if you want to email me separately or have a discussion at another time, feel free to do that as well. But would like to hear more about that from that particular board member at some point.
This is Mike. I'll elaborate on the 3131 that you gave credit to Jesse on. Jesse had expressed those feelings just now, but I wrote that comment. So Jesse and I both are very aligned on that particular question.
Yeah. Anything you want to add to it, Mike, or just was that discussion been had?
No, I think that's enough, and Jesse did a good job, and I agree with Jesse.
I'm curious, Mike, do you think we should be calling out those questions? I have no doubt that those questions should be guiding us. Like, I don't want to rewrite the policy, but like, should we be more explicit about that?
Yeah, I think we should, and we see them in every package we get. They're on the back of it. But I've never heard it made explicit, and I think we should start. If we talk about it a little bit more, then I think we'll be thinking about it. I have to say, I don't think about it.
Okay. Kathleen, go ahead.
I'm the one who wrote 3.1.1, and it's just sort of been I came onto the board shortly after policy governance was just implemented. And it's just sort of been my observation sitting back. We get lots of excellent input from our CEO, from Matt Carpenter, with regards to policy suggestions or the things that he sees that needs to be tweaked. And when he does that, and I see his suggestions, I think, oh, I should have caught that. Or maybe I should have seen that. Or why didn't another board member catch that? And so I just sort of, for me personally, it wasn't a total board critique, but I feel like I need to take those training wheels off. That I want to continue to have input from the CEO with regards to policy and things that he sees, because obviously his input is invaluable. But for me, I want to be better at catching those things myself as the board, because the board is supposed to be driving our bus a little. I don't know. I guess it was just more of a self comment. But again, I do think that what he brings is invaluable, but that we should be bringing just as much as the CEO to our own table and suggest policy issues ourselves.
I think that's a
Well,
fair
thank you.
point, because usually our policy discussions are in response to the CEO saying, I don't, like, not feeling completely comfortable with the policy, or feeling like it needs clarification for him to know how to interpret it, which is, that's part of our job. I don't know if that's enough.
No, I think, Jesse, you hit it on the head. We do, it is often Matt saying, I don't know what you mean by this, or this, there's not enough here for me to interpret that. And then it usually sparks a policy discussion. Do we need it? Should we revise it? Something like that. I kind of interpreted Kathleen's comments also to mean that we should be thinking outside the box a little bit to decide for ourselves going through this. It would be nice to see more board members say, hey, I was taking a look at section, at the investment policy section, or the asset protection section, and I think, or the construction section, or whatever it is. And I think, we can go in a different direction. So, taking the lead for that. And, at some point, we have a finance committee, we have a service committee, we have a governance committee. What we don't have, strangely enough, and it's occurred to me on some occasions, what we don't have is a policy committee. We don't have anybody who's kind of looking at section by section to say, should we look at this in a different way, or should we bring this to the board, et cetera. And maybe there's something we can do in that regard in terms of a policy committee, or some, cross, almost like a conference committee. When the House and Senate get together and they, exchange a bill, they have a kind of a conference committee, somebody from, a couple people from finance, a couple people from governance, and et cetera, and they can get together and think about policy issues. But something to think about if we want to really take a bigger leadership role in driving policy discussions, that would probably be the way to do it. I think if you just left it to board members on their own to say, pick something out of the air and drive it forward, they might be a little intimidated. It might be a little, it might seem like a daunting task to gather all that support and think about what to do, and then gather recommendations and do all the research and everything else. But if we had a structure in place, that might drive that a little bit better. Matt?
Thank you. I actually want to compliment Jesse. Looking at this comment, I thought immediately over the last year of him championing the policy about using buses to transport demonstrators. That is not something, I would have brought up. I'm kind of operating in sort of a housekeeping mode when I look at the policies, but that was a very proactive position. And I think that's a great example of doing well in this area. And I would very much encourage board members to engage with the policies. It really is your biggest steering wheel for the organization.
Any other comments on that? Okay. All right, moving on then to 3.2, the board job description. And probably the most split one we had was the board job description on the boards will be the authoritative linkage between the ownership and operational organization. And we had everything but never in there. So one person said rarely, one said some, three people said most, and three people said always. So any particular person want to comment on that? We were kind of all over the map with that one. If somebody says we rarely do it or we only sometimes do it, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts, or we can have that discussion at another time, but thought this was an interesting one. So anybody want to weigh in or have a comment or question? Mike?
First of all, I'll unmask myself and say I'm some of the time. And maybe I think about that more often just because of the ownership linkage task force. I don't know, but I want to make a general comment. Really, it's more than surprising to see such a dispersion of opinions. It's very easy to understand that there'd be some that would say always or most of the time. There's just one. There's nothing in between those two votes, and it's certainly a matter of interpretation. Or some of the time and most of the time, only, they're pretty close. Where do you draw the line? But it's pretty surprising to see 3 for always and 1 for rarely. And actually, once we get further along, we'll see some, I think there's 2 of them in there that have a never and have some always. And wow, obviously people are interpreting these very differently. And when they're not real specific, like this one isn't real specific, it's easy to have different interpretations. But wow, particularly later when we have never and always.
Yeah. Agreed.
And I think the ones that we have these kinds of differences, and this would include this one, we should have some more discussions on, not necessarily today, but we should look at the particular policies and think about either revising it or having some discussions to have more uniformity on how they're interpreted.
Agreed. Jesse, go ahead.
I'm actually really interested to hear from the people who said always and most of the time on that, because I will out myself as having not completed this survey, so I'm very sorry about that. But I probably would have said rarely, having thought so much about ownership linkage and feeling that, with ownership linkage as we defined it on the task force, I don't feel like we have been doing it as a board, but I am curious if maybe there is some linkage that's going on, that if people are doing it in a more informal way, like what, if people feel that we are doing ownership linkage, I'm very curious to hear what that looks like to people, because I think that can help inform what we talk about on the task force.
Yeah, I think it's driven by, I'd be interested in hearing others' comments about that, but I think Mike hit it on the head. It is a matter of interpretation. What do you mean by authoritative linkage? Are we the authoritative linkage as opposed to, for instance, the staff, the CEO being the authoritative linkage? I mean, that's one point you could debate. Between the ownership and the operational organization, what ownership and what part of the operational organization do you mean? I mean, that is another point of debate. I would think you could, on the one hand, debate and say, sometimes we are, and sometimes we're not, because the staff does so many town halls and public meetings, et cetera. They're kind of acting as that authoritative linkage between their owners and themselves as the operational organization, and maybe we're not fostering that, so we are not the authoritative linkage in that case. But at the same time, you could interpret authoritative linkage to mean, when it comes down to it, the board is governing this organization and therefore is ultimately accountable for its performance. has to answer to the public and the moral owners, and that's a layer between the CEO and staff and our legal owners, for instance. And so just by default or by law and by structure, we are the authoritative linkage at all times. So it's easy to say always, because we can't not be the authoritative linkage between owners and operations. So again, it's you could interpret this a number of different ways, and the split, and none of them are wrong, by the way. I'm not saying any of those are right or wrong, but what it might foster is better interpretation or guidance, and quite frankly, better wording of the policy itself, so it's clearer what we mean. And then, would probably foster a policy discussion about what does authoritative linkage mean in this case. So, and does that mean you have to necessarily be proactive? I think, as you were kind of implying, Jesse, I think you would probably say rarely, because I interpreted what you said to mean, are people being more proactive in an informal way? But this doesn't necessarily say that you have to be proactive in your ownership linkage, that you have to go out and talk to the public, just that you are going to be sometimes that linkage or the authoritative linkage in that respect. So maybe we can think about how to revise this policy and better interpret it. I would be very interested in that. Any others? All right. Thank you for that discussion. We'll move on to 3211, effective ambassadorship and coordinated advocacy. We have a most of the time, half, and then a little split there with some of the time, and one person said always. Any comments on that one? Or the next one, we had another interesting split, 322. Strategic leadership and vision of the organization through its policy making. 3 said always, 2 said most, and 3 said some of the time. Another very interesting split. I think that's probably a function of, again, the way this is worded. Strategic leadership and vision through policy making, those two things, and one causing the other. Does one cause the other? Are we doing any of those? Are we doing it through policy making? There's a lot to consider there if you boil it down. But any comments about that one? Did anybody not feel, for instance, that 322 is worded correctly or appropriately? Or any comments about that? If you want to think about it, get back to me later, that's fine too. Okay. Moving on to 323. Written governing policies that address the broadest levels of the organization, decisions, ends, et cetera, et cetera. Interesting, we had 3 people who said always, 5 people who said most of the time. And I would be interested in hearing from people how if we only do it most of the time, when do we not do this? I guess would be my question there. So that would, when I read some of these, I had the same question: when do we not do this? And I would ask for some examples. So if you have any, please feel free to jump in and say that if you have something in mind when you answered most of the time here. But if nothing's coming to mind, feel free to get back to me at another time. Okay. 324 then, same, another split. Half said most of the time, 3 said always, 1 said some of the time. And that's assuring successful performance on ends and executive limitations. And again, I would be interested if you said less than, if you did not say always, I would be interested in hearing examples of when we don't provide this assurance. Not that we're perfect, I fully get that. We certainly are not, but I hope the standard there wasn't we have to be perfect on every single thing. I hope that wasn't the standard people were applying there. But if it was, that's fine. We need to talk about that. Any questions there? All right, 325 then, we had an even split about CEO assurance of CEO performance through evaluation of organization performance. And I think we do write that into the CEO evaluation form about organizational performance. So that is part of the feedback we give the CEO and thus the staff about organizational performance. But I'd be interested to hear anybody's comments there if they want to make any. And 326, annual performance review and appropriate adjustment of CEO salary. We had 3 people who said we do that most of the time. I think we've carried out an annual performance review every year. Matt, have we ever missed one? I don't remember. But I think we've done that always, and maybe that's most of the time the appropriate adjustment of CEO salary. People feel that's only most of the time. I don't know. But if you have an example when we did not do that, please, let me know if we missed something. All right, moving on to 327. I think this might have been the one that we all said, yep, we do that, which is adopt a budget. So it's good since we all voted on it. It's required by law and policy and pretty much everywhere. We do that. A contract with the CEO that will stipulate comp benefits and terms and conditions for the CEO. One person said most of the time. I don't know how we would achieve a contract with the CEO most of the time, but if you have an example of when we didn't do that, please let me know. Okay. Again, 329, similar split. We had one person who said approval of rider fare increases and millage rates assessed by the authority. One person said most of the time, and I would be curious to know when we have failed to do that, if anybody has an example. And same with 310, acquiring real estate at Cumberland's disposal. 3/4, 6 out of 8 said we always do it. 2 people said we do it most of the time. And again, if you have examples of when we didn't do that or we made a real estate deal without board approval, it would be news to me. So please step forward and let me know when we failed to do that. Any questions about that?
I think that'd be a violation of executive. I think that'd be a violation of executive limitations if he.
You're right. Yeah, you would be right. All right, and then some comments then at the end of 3.2, which, somebody at 3.10 said, depends on limitations, may not need direct board approval. Whoever made that comment, I'd be interested to know when that would, what circumstances that would be. And I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot, but if you have some examples or something to add, please mention it. And again, we are missing Raymond and Kyra tonight, so this might be something from somebody who's not here. And then 321, 3211, ownership linkage task force has been reinstated. Believe the board will improve that area. Thank you very much for that. All right.
Can I ask Matt to speak to the real estate thing? That stuck out to me that 2 people thought that maybe sometimes he does acquire or dispose of real estate. Matt, what is your understanding of that policy?
So I can't speak to whoever answered this this policy because this is about the board's responsibility to make those approvals, not my executive constraint. Jesse is correct. There is an executive constraint that says I can't do those things, and that this is the corresponding partner policy that says you are the ones who get to approve those things. So we haven't encumbered any real estate. You will note in my interpretation from this that sort of short-term operational leases, I did say that those I could do. And I do think we have one right now, but I don't think that's what this was intended for. So I don't know why I can't speak to why someone would answer this policy in this way. Perhaps they were thinking of something else, but I do believe from an executive limitation perspective, we will be reporting compliance with the executive limitation partner policy to this.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Moving on to 3.3, Board of Code of Conduct. This is one of the interesting ones that Mike referred to earlier. We have 3 people who said always and 1 person who said never. And just 1 person who said sometimes and 3 people who said most of the time. So members must demonstrate loyalty to the ownership of the AAATA, unconflicted by loyalties to CEO or staff or other organizations or any personal interests as consumers. The 1 person who said never, I would love to know. This sounds like we're like, kind of the Chicago's, city council back in the 1920s. It was just every hooligan for themselves or something like that. Like we're just kind of like the Wild West. But I have to assume that somebody interpreted this in such a way that they said, well, the way I interpret it, we never do this. And so I would be interested in hearing that person's interpretation. And if you were one of the people who voted most of the time, sometimes, do you have specific examples of when somebody did not demonstrate this loyalty? Rich, you're off mute. Go ahead.
That actually may have been me. Frankly, I can't remember my answers that I gave to the survey, but as you were saying that, I was going, wait a second. I think I remember that question. I interpreted it as we're not supposed to be, I can't remember, like influenced, or not supposed to influence the CEO on that, which is maybe why, I don't know, like I'm thinking I might have been the one that answered that as never.
Where was your,
because
I'm just curious, did you think you answered never, meaning we have never violated that policy? Is that what you meant to?
Correct, right.
Got it. So we're going to count you as an always because of that. So
okay, yeah.
Come on over to the blue.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, for those who voted most of the time or some of the time, I'd be interested to hear if you have specific examples of when people did not demonstrate full loyalty to the board or allowed personal interests or conflicts to get in the way. If you don't want to step up and say it here, feel free. As the chair of the board, I would expect this should not be, if there's a conflict and a board member knows about it and they have concerns about it, this survey should not be the first time I hear about that, right? You should call me about that right away. You shouldn't wait for a survey to say, yeah, I think people are violating their loyalty to the board. So if I would challenge those board members, to do a little bit better and being proactive and speaking up. If you really think that somebody has failed to demonstrate loyalty to the board, let me know right away. Okay. Moving on into 3.3.2, we have an even split here. Avoid conflicts with respect to legal duties of care and loyalty. This applies. Half the people think we only avoid conflicts and meet our legal duties most of the time. Not sure I want people to put on the record in a public meeting when we have violated our legal duties or conflicts of interest. But again, if you really think that somebody is violating their conflict of interest to the board or the ride, or they have violated a legal duty, again, this should not be the first time that I hear about this in a survey. You should, please come to me immediately with any concerns about that.
So this is Rich again. I think this might be showing my newness to this, because I think it's the very first time that I've done this or answered this policy or this survey. And I thought I kind of viewed it more of a test to just like, if you were to answer these questions as a board member, like how should you actually be reacting in these situations? And so for instance, like the last question, I was just like, well, of course, we should never be influencing like the CEO. And I think for this, that's part of the same approach I was taking with a lot of these following questions. more of like how are we actually supposed to act versus how have we been acting in regards to these. So I probably will have to, if it helps, it might be better if I maybe redo my answers to the survey, because I think I took it from a completely different viewpoint.
No, I think the problem is the structure then. I don't think it's you. I think then if that was, I think the way we answered it and the survey itself should have been clear about what criteria to use. So I don't think it was, I think, Rich, you're a smart guy. You can follow instructions. I know that. So probably the fault is the instructions itself. It's not you.
I appreciate that, but I may have just read it incorrectly.
Okay. Well, I think again, to Rich's point, if it was unclear how to answer these, please let me know. And again, if there are conflicts of interest, please let me know that right away as well. Would appreciate hearing about that. Any other comments on 332? If not, 3321, we had 3/4 say always, and 2 people said most of the time. And this was directly, again, this is a serious issue about self-dealing. And if somebody has an example or where they observe someone acting in this capacity, aside, maybe from what Rich said about, theoretically versus what has actually taken place. But if anybody sees or observes this, please let me know right away. Any questions about that? 3322, another very interesting split. 5 people saying, 4 people saying always, 2 saying most, 1 person saying rarely, and 1 person saying never. I don't know if the person saying never, again, unless you mean that we have never had to do this, which I understand. But this policy is, when the board's about to decide an issue about an unavoidable conflict of interest, that member shall absent themselves, et cetera. I wonder if I might have been the never on this one, because I don't remember we ever having to do this one. So I don't think my never might have been, we've never violated this policy. So I'm probably in the blue camp as well, but I think we've always adhered to it. And I don't remember a time we've ever said to anybody, hey, excuse yourself, so, because you have a conflict here or something like that. But any comments on 3322? All right. Moving on to 3323, we were all aligned on that one, so good for us. 333, board members may not attempt to exercise individual authority over the organization. If as the board chair, if you have any examples of this where you felt it was somebody who's acting inappropriately in terms of exercising influence, please let me know. Unless you think I was the one who was doing it, and then case, talk to Kyra. So, and tell her. And so she can put me in check. So in any event, if anybody has any questions about that, any comments, questions about that one? All right. 3331, any comments, questions about that? Or 3332, members' interaction with the public and press must recognize limitations, etc. We had 1 person who said most of the time. So if you have any examples of when we didn't do that or when we failed to do this, please let me know. I think we're mostly aligned on that one. 3333, we had a little bit of a split there. And that was, members will not express individual judgments on performance of the CEO or their staff. I think we kind of sort of violate this to begin with, because we do a CEO review where we do comment on his individual performance as a CEO as well as an organization. But split there. Any confusion or any comments about that? Matt, then Kathleen.
Well, Kathleen should go first.
Kathleen, go ahead.
So for me, I'm the one, I think, who made the comment that comes later at the end of the section. it's an area that I think we need either leniency or we need to be more diligent about, but it has always bothered me that this policy says you can't, and yet we do. You know, we and our staff and our CEO, they need to be supported. You know, when John Metzinger and his crew and his staff won, you know, that beautiful award 3 years in a row, and we said, what a brilliant job you did. But then when you read this policy, we're not supposed to call anyone out and say you did a brilliant job. And so I think we need to reflect on what this policy actually means, and how do we want to move forward with it, because I think it ties our hands a little bit. I need more clarification as to what we really meant by that policy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the stem of it, Kathleen, and again, I think you started right after we adopted policy governance, but it's driven by, you know, the policy governance handbook, which says that the CEO should only be judged by the ends and whether or not the ends were met. And that should be the only thing we really judge the CEO on, and therefore through him, the entire organization. And so that should be it. We didn't feel comfortable doing that and just kind of leaving it at that. So we didn't want to kind of scrap our whole CEO performance appraisal process. So we kept it. You know, on the, you know, we had a lot of discussion about it, but we kept it on the notion of, you know, the organization could be really good and hit these, and the CEO could be, you know, less than good, right? And so, you know, it could be the CEO that is weighing the rest of the organization down, and we should have a mechanism to say, do we have the right person in that spot, rather than just saying, well, all the ends are met, so we can't touch the CEO. And so we kind of kept this split mindset about that, but, you know, you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, should we, you know, I've always said policy governance was made to serve us. We're not made to serve policy governance. So if we're going to do something that ties our hands or doesn't make sense or inhibits us in some way, in a way we don't like, we should, you know, get rid of it or adjust it. I mean, it's, you know, we're not out to win a policy governance award. We're out to get the best system that we can. So, you know, I think that's a point well made and something to think about. Matt?
Thank you. I wanted to relay a conversation I had with Raymond Hess, since he's not here. And I don't remember the exact circumstances, but he had interaction with either Brian or John, I can't recall, and was just so happy with the outcome of it that he sent an email CC to me, just thanking the deputy and just saying, this worked out really well. I think you did a great job. And then he sent me a follow-up email and said, oops, Matt, did I overstep? And I think he was talking about this policy. And I think this policy is intended to discourage board members from publicly shaming staff members at a board meeting or something like that. I don't think it's intended to restrict you from the attaboys and good jobs that I know you guys really like to do, and I think are essential to building a good team. And Rose may disagree with me on that one, strict interpretation, but I know Raymond had a similar concern that Kathleen just expressed, and I wanted to.
I mean, that's the downside. If we get rid of that policy, you know, does it open up for board members to start saying things about, you know, individual staff members, which we don't want, but maybe there's a way we can thread the needle somehow, some way, and think about that. But Mike?
I think this is one policy where we could very easily make some refinement in the wording, instead of making this an absolute prohibition. When you look at the words, I think there's an easy fix to that in the policy language, not to throw it out.
Maybe the governance committee can take a look at this at some point and come back to the board with a recommendation. All right. Okay, 334 again. I think we've all conducted ourselves in a calm, professional, and respectful manner, but at least one person thinks we don't do that 100% of the time. So if you have any examples, let me know, but I think we're all pretty much aligned there. The same comment about 335, respecting confidentiality appropriate to issues of a sensitive nature. We're all pretty much aligned there, except one outlier. Board members will be properly prepared for board deliberation. I'm not going to ask if the board members who sit most of the time are talking about themselves or others. I won't ask. No need to be a snitch on anybody else, but an interesting split there. Any questions, comments about that one? 337, examples of legitimacy in terms of being the final authority on final determination. Mostly aligned with that one. Any questions there? 338, same thing. Members will follow the no surprises rule when it comes to keeping the board chair and the CEO informed of intended actions, etc. I think it's pretty straightforward. Any questions? 339. When serving on other boards, members remain accountable to our board for their actions and statements. I guess the question there is, have we had an opportunity or a need to enforce accountability? 5 out of 8 said we've always done this. 3 said most of the time. Any comments, questions about that? All right, 3-4, agenda planning. We got some interesting splits in this one. 3-4-1, certainly we had to make some adjustments this year to our strategic planning, administrative planning, et cetera. Hopefully we can all get better aligned around that one the next time we do this survey. But certainly this was a unique year and therefore probably a split, and everybody's, there's no wrong answers for that one, or any of them. 3-4-2, the cycle will start with blah, blah, blah. And I think I interpret this to mean the board needs more input into this agenda planning, which is probably right, but any comments, questions about that? Anybody have a different view or take? Okay. 3-4-3, throughout the year, the board will attend to consent agenda items as expeditiously as possible. A couple people said most of the time. The same with 3-4-4, CEO monitoring will be on the agenda reports, inspection monitoring, et cetera. If you have any examples of when we have not done this that have concerned you, please bring them to my attention. Don't wait for a survey to bring anything to my attention that bothers you about that. Any questions, concerns I want to express? 3-4-5 had an even split about board members recommending board discussion, etc. And 3-4-6, we had another interesting split, 3, 3, and 2. Information that is neither monitoring performance nor for board decisions will be avoided and minimized whenever possible. And again, I would just say, please share examples with me so we can improve in this area. If you think we're getting off base with a discussion, or it's what we're talking about is irrelevant. I think I try to be as efficient as possible with our meetings and not let them stray too much. But at the same time, we have to balance board members' right and ability to speak and say what they want to say. So if you have any examples where you think we got off base too much, please let me know.
And would any discussion of operational matters be a violation of that? Like the CEO report that we have at the end of every, that's not strictly regards to policy. Is that?
That's a good point. Some people might have had that in mind, Jesse. When you now that you say that, that's a very good point, and maybe we need to think about revising that policy to include other information that the board may find helpful for its duties, which is something like the CEO report. But I think you could lump a whole lot of things into nor for board decisions, right? I mean, any piece of information we get could eventually lead to a board decision of some kind. But I think your point, it's not very specific, and that would be kind of malleable way of thinking about it, but maybe we need to rethink that one. Any other comments on that one? 347, CEO remuneration will be decided during the month of June, et cetera. Very interesting split, and I don't blame us for having a large split there, because we have a contract in place with the CEO that determines remuneration and his terms and conditions of employment. So we don't revise it, although we do look at it every year in terms of CEO appraisal, et cetera. So I wonder if we might revise that one in the future, because I'm not sure it's totally applicable. And I think I'm not alone in thinking that it's confusing given the split that we have there. But any comments about the confusion or how they interpret the policy there? Okay. 348, following the agendas. 3/4 of the people think we do this all the time. A couple of people think we deviate a little bit. It's fine. Any questions about that? Any concerns? 3.5, the chief governance officer role, mostly aligned on 3.5.1. If you have examples of when we haven't adhered to that, please let me know. Same with 3.5.1.1, meeting discussions will consist solely of issues that clearly belong to the board or decided to monitor for board policy. I think most of the time it might be the right answer, though, because I think it goes back to Jesse's point a minute ago. What about something like CEO reports or things like that? I mean, I think there are things on our agenda we talk about that don't technically meet this criteria, but I think we do meet this criteria plus more. Any comments or questions about that one? Okay, 3.5.1.2 then, deliberation will be fair, open, and thorough, but timely, orderly, and kept to the point. A couple people think, the majority think we do it all the time. A couple people think it's most of the time. Again, if you have concerns about the deliberations themselves and you have any things you think we need to improve on, please let me know. I'm happy for and would welcome feedback. Any questions, comments there? Okay. 3.5.2, same comment. If you have any examples of how we can improve, please let me know. Any comments or questions on that one? 3.5.2.1, I think we're mostly aligned there. CGO is empowered to chair the board meetings and blah, blah, blah. One person thinks we do that most of the time. I'm not sure when we don't do that, but if you have any concerns, let me know. Same with 3.5.2.2. Give me some examples of when that hasn't been the case, and I'll be happy to address those. 3.5.2.3. Any comments or questions about that? Or 3.5.2.4, the last one in that section. All right. So I think the comment there, this sounds like the comment at the end, not sure about understanding 3.5.2.0, 3.5.2.3. I wonder if that's based on what you said earlier, Rich, maybe your comment there. I think it's, the right way to say it is how has the role acted in the past? And I think that's what we're measuring ourselves by. Like, how have we lived up to this? Always, mostly, sometimes, rarely, never. I think that's the way to think about it. And if that was unclear to anybody about answering these, that's my fault. I'll make that clear, in the future. Any comments or questions, though? Okay, 3.6.1. We have one person who said never. 3 people said always. Half the people said most of the time. I think what's confusing about this is that last sentence there where it's, or last clause where it says, in keeping with the board's broader focus, board committees will normally not have direct dealings with current staff operations, which sounds, I'm not trying to interpret that because, that's what the committees exist to do. I mean, at least finance and service, they do. I mean, they don't influence or tell the staff what to do in terms of staff operations, but they certainly have what I would think to be direct dealings with the staff. And that's what they exist for. So I wonder if, we should get rid of that, move it around, think about revising it. It's something that I've marked for consideration in terms of what I think is confusing, but any, I don't think we're not about to get rid of our committees, so maybe we just need to adjust this. Any comments or questions there? Okay, 362, board committees may not speak up or act. I think we're all fairly aligned there. And I'll just go through real quick some of the rest of these to see if there's any comments. 363, any comments? 364, other groups will work in an ad hoc capacity. Any comments there? 365, there was a comment at the end about the section, the board liaison to the CEO will be a little different from this policy. The CEO is requesting input in the LAC under the leadership of the CEO. We have kind of recently revised our LAC policy to make it directly accountable to the CEO. The parameters of the liaison role are more kind of clearly explained there. Is there any question, whoever wrote that, any kind of question that they want to bring up at this time, or they want to save that for another time?
That was me.
Okay.
I think it just had to do with the reforming of the LAC under the CEO. The CEO had asked for, and he's allowed to ask for advice from anyone at any time. I just was unclear because none of us have a single voice. We speak for the board as a board. And so, but in this kind of area, I felt a little gray about it. So that's why I made that comment. I just was seeking more clarification.
Okay. Is it still unclear to you, or do you think there's more follow-up that needs to be done?
No, I have gotten better educated since I wrote that comment and have a better understanding of the policy and realize that it was my own interpretation that was muddling the situation.
Got it. Okay. All right. And moving on to any other comments or questions there? If not, moving on to board committee structure. Most of the time, 371. Any comments about that? 372, we had a split there. And I imagine that has to do with the existence of the executive committee itself, which has never really existed, never really met. We're going to take steps to probably just kind of eliminate that and move the board secretary role into, I mean, it's kind of already been subsumed into the governance committee, but we'll probably, with the treasurer role not really being fulfilled and board secretary going to governance committee, we'll probably eliminate this committee altogether since it's not really done anything. So I'm not too concerned about that. Any questions about that? 373. Any comments, questions there? 374, which is service committee. I think we all know what those two committees do. 375, task force. Okay, and I think at the end, like I said, executive committee is kind of the main concern. And then I would also be interested in hearing people's comments about any other comments they have about the committee structure offline, particularly, moving people from one committee to another? Should we rotate? Should we do anything else? If you have thoughts about thinking outside the box with that, feel free to bring it up at any time. All right. Finally, last section, cost of governance. We can go through this quickly. Any comments on 381, 3811, or 3812? 38121, which I think we do in terms of contracting audited firms. I think we rotate that fairly well, but if anybody has any comments, concerns, please let me know. 3813. We could probably spend a lot of time on this one, which is, outreach mechanisms will be used as needed to ensure ability to listen to owner viewpoints, et cetera. Any comments or questions about that? I mean, there's a fairly, that's under cost of governance. So, I mean, presumably we're talking about, are we, giving the right amount of resources to this effort? But if you have any comments, questions about that, let me know. 382, the next one, any comments there? 383, the board will develop its budget by June 30th. We had one person who said rarely, one person who said most, and everybody else said yes. Any comments there? One person said, don't have enough personal knowledge to answer 38121. So thank you for that comment. If people felt like, if other people felt that way, that they couldn't answer that because they didn't know, then we can provide more information in the future about them. All right. So thank you for your participation in that and for going through that exercise. I know it had to take some time to do that, but I really appreciate it. And if anybody has any follow-up comments about anything in the survey that they want to reach out and have a conversation with me about, just feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'd be happy and would welcome that. Okay. If there's nothing else on that, we'll move on to section 4, the budget amendment proposal. I'll send it to Matt Carpenter. Go ahead, Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for plowing through that last agenda item. Think of it this way, you only have to do that once a year. Previously it was strung out little bits and pieces. This time we put it all together. So you got 12 months before you had to do that again. So thank you. So in your packet today, starting on page 65, is a budget amendment for your consideration and possible approval this evening. This is an amendment to the fiscal year 2021 budget. That's the year we are in right now. So this would only be in the next 5 months until the end of September. As you may recall, as we entered this budget year about 6 months ago, during the midst of the pandemic, we all knew that we may need to amend the budget. So hopefully this isn't a surprise. This amendment was, I want to thank those who helped pull it together. Chief among them, obviously, our former CFO, John Metzinger, who I am happy to report has begun his job in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and has left me here to present this all by myself. Thank you, John. Also, I'm not here completely by myself. Acting Manager of Finance, Caitlin Conley, is here. Unfortunately, our acting CFO, Latasha Thompson, had a pre-scheduled vacation this week, so she can't be with us. Nevertheless, if you'll bear with me, I will lead you through this presentation with Caitlin's support. So this amendment has several elements to it and can get a little complicated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through them just to make sure we sort of have an orientation and an overview. I'm going to refer to the board packet. So anyone listening at home may want to pull it up beginning on page 65. I'm not going to read the packet. I'm going to hit the highlights. I'm going to try to talk about it at a high level as quickly as I can to turn it over to board discussion and questions. So if we turn to page 67, this is maybe a good place to start. So we have a great opportunity here. We have a very unexpected situation, unprecedented in my career, where we have a surplus of one-time federal relief funds that have been provided to us by the federal government because of the pandemic. These are in the form of what I call IOUs for eligible expenses. And you can see on page 3, the lists and the dollar amounts associated with the 3 pieces of federal legislation. These are pieces of legislation that were critical to providing operational support for some of the largest transit agencies in our country, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, among them. And they are burning through this money at a very fast rate, keeping their cities moving. But many smaller agencies like us are in a position very similar. To be direct about it, we're very grateful for the money, but this is more operating dollars than we can spend in a reasonable period of time. So, so we have to figure out something to do with this money. To be blunt about it, if we don't use it, we may lose it. And many agencies are following similar paths as we are. But to continue on page 67, these are IOUs. And what I mean by this is we do not have the money. It is not in hand. The money is reimbursed to us. So we will incur expenses over the next several years, send the receipts to the Federal Transit Administration, Region 5 office in Chicago. They will look at them and say, yes, that's an eligible expense, and we will reimburse you, and they'll cut us a check back for that money. So that's what we mean by an IOU or a reimbursement. What are eligible expenses? These are very much limited strictly to pandemic-related things. The middle of page 67 goes into detail, but it's really pandemic expenses, sanitation, cleaning, PPE, payroll, a variety of other things. And then finally, these are one-time funds, and that's critical going forward, that when these funds are used, they will be gone. And you actually have a policy, board policy, executive limitation 248, that is meaningful here because it means that I cannot create unfunded future obligations. So we couldn't, for example, use these funds to start a whole new set of bus lines because we know that the money will run out and we'd have to cancel all that service. So those are some of the limitations, the nature of these funds. So when I mentioned that many smaller agencies like us are following a similar path to what we're going to propose this evening, I'm about to lay that out for you. So if you look on page 68, you will see a narrative that describes the key steps I'm about to verbalize in a bit more detail. And then starting on page 69, we go into more detail. I think the important thing to understand with these 2 pages is that we are giving you a multi-year context. It will take several years of budget actions to implement the approach that I'll describe to you this evening. So the 5-month decision that we'll ask you to consider tonight for the remainder of this fiscal year is hopefully contextualized by this multi-year strategy, so you can see sort of the end game and how this goes. So if I might direct your attention to page 69, because it's got some of the details and we'll go through there. There are 3 broad steps to this. The first step is to accelerate the use of these federal funds while we essentially stop spending our local property tax revenues. As you see on the top of page 69, we are estimating, and I want to stress that these are estimates and all these numbers are likely to shift over the next few years a little bit, that it will take about 4 years between 2021 and 2024 to draw down all of these federal funds. Now, we are going to propose a few other uses of these funds in the meantime, but I'm going to skip ahead to the second big step, The second big step is to repurpose those local funds that we have been saving. Primarily, they will be diverted into a capital reserve. The vast majority of the funds would go into a capital reserve. What is a capital reserve? We've never had, frankly, we've never had the money to create such a thing. But what it is it's a kind of like a bank account where we save up our pennies so that we can afford to buy big ticket items later on. It is a walled off part of our existing bank account systems where we simply store this money until we decide when to spend it. The capital reserve in and of itself is like a bank account. It is not the decision to spend the money. It is only the place the money will be stored until the board reaches a decision about how it would like to spend that money. There's also an insurance reserve. It's a much smaller one-time thing that I'd be happy to speak about. And then finally, creating an operating reserve is the third major step. This is actually not related to the federal funds at all. We already have and have had for some time a healthy operating reserve, which is merely a cash flow buffer so that we can make payroll, for example, if there was any disruption to cash flow. What we're doing here, I would characterize as accounting housekeeping and cleaning up our spreadsheets so that when we have a capital reserve, an insurance reserve, and an operating reserve, it's a little more orderly in our presentations. So I'd like to bounce up or bounce back, I think, to page 69 and revisit that first step with the accelerated use of federal funds. So I want to just be clear about the top half of page 69. So you can see there the amount of federal funds we would be using each year. Roughly that same amount of local funds would be heading towards the capital reserve. So that's, I think, the big step we're recommending this evening. But there are two smaller steps that I don't want to gloss over. The first, there are some pandemic-related operational expenses we'd like to ask authorization to proceed with. The first is an essential worker bonus for all AAA TA staff. Now, this works out to $3,000 per staff person. After taxes, we expect this is going to be about $2,300. Now, we know that this is an important step. Our staff have performed exemplary through this very, very difficult time. Many of them have been on the front lines of what has come to be known as an essential service. They kept running through some of the most difficult times of this pandemic. Services like Lansing and Saginaw did shut down their fixed route and paratransit operations. We did not. Even the staff who were and staff who were not on the front lines still came, fixed the buses, cleaned them, fueled them, made payroll every day. Staff who worked in the offices, did different work, but in its own way, very stressful, working at home, isolated from their colleagues, unable to have the kind of collaboration that they normally rely on to get their jobs done. So we understand that this is a big step, and frankly, not every institution is so fortunate as we are right now to be able to do this for our staff, and we understand that. So we wanted to ask the board to join us in just acknowledging and recognizing and saying thank you to the staff who've worked so hard over the last year. And this is a gesture intended to make some small, like I say, gesture in that direction. So I do want to clarify also a union element to this bonus. The proposed bonus has been discussed with the union president. She was informed that it would include both union and non-union staff, and that a letter of agreement between us and the union is going to be necessary before we could proceed. The president indicated to us that she didn't think it was going to be a problem to get a letter of agreement for us to give them a bonus. She seemed to think that that would not be hard to achieve. So if tonight, once the payment of this bonus is authorized by you, then staff would work to finalize a letter of agreement with the union, and at that point, the bonus would be dispersed to all staff. So I wanted to clarify the bonus element of this proposal. Underneath that, yes, we are going to continue to spend these relief funds on pandemic-related supplies, materiel, and other features. Finally, and this is a clarification to make sure that the math all balances, for those of you who are adding the numbers across the pages, we will be deferring, we get regular formula funding from the federal and state government. That money can be banked. We can save that while we use the relief funds. So the use of those funds, which in normal days we spend very quickly, those are going to be deferred. They will be banked until the future so that we can use them for appropriate eligible expenses at a later date. So with that, I would ask everyone maybe to turn to page 71, where you can see an illustration, a graphic that attempts to convey this complicated and multifaceted amendment in a pictorial form. I hope this graphic helps. And then I can ask you to turn to page 72, and I can pause here because everything that I've just said is kind of set up, and I'm sorry about that, but I wanted to contextualize this decision for you this evening. So all of that was to give you context about the multi-year strategy that we're embarking on, and that the single decision that you'll be asked to make tonight is part of a larger plan. So the decision for this evening begins on page 72 and goes on for the next 3 pages. So on page 72, you see attachment 2. This goes into some details about the specific amendment to the 2021 operating budget. Most of it is concerned with beginning the process I just outlined for you, but there are a couple other what I call housekeeping items in here. We don't want to, we want to be transparent. We are required to be transparent. So there are a few other things in here about state operating assistance being higher than expected, making sure we account for revenue from Toyota. You may recall that they're helping us out with TheRide in the Ypsilanti area. Advertising revenue has been better than expected. And there's also changes to expenses. And I want to highlight the first one there because this has to do with the subject of staff. And this is an important feature of the budget, and I don't want to gloss over it. We have been staffing back up. Obviously, we had some of the biggest staff changes in our history in the last year, and we've been bringing people back steadily since. We have brought back all bus drivers and most other operational staff by this point. We're gearing up for the August rollout, which requires all hands on deck. But we're also trying to position ourselves to go into a growth mode. When we're talking about building up a capital reserve and earmarks, which I hope to maybe address under the CEO's report, we may be going into a growth period, and adding planning staff seems like possibly a reasonable decision at this point. So the big ask in this section, if you will, maybe on line 3 of that first bullet there, is I'm asking for your authorization this evening to add 4 additional staff to be determined. The executive team is working through a list of priorities for staffing requests. So this request here for 4 FTEs is a placeholder. I don't know that we'll need all 4, but I want to make sure that when the accountants, when the auditors come back later and say, you know, did you get board approval for these things, that it is, you know, that everything is neat and tidy and above board. A couple other interesting things here. TheRide will be restarting next week, but their budget is now coming from a completely separate state fund and has nothing to do with us at all anymore. So we're catching that up. And I think those are maybe the highlights of that page. On page 73, you see the math. John and Caitlin and Latasha have gone over this, and if you have any questions about the variances here, we'd be happy to explore them with you. The interesting thing is, when it's all said and done, if you look at the bottom line, our expenses actually go down, which is an interesting positive effect. Not one I would have guessed when we started this year, but I'll take it. And then finally, in closing, and I am in closing here, if you turn to page 74, you will find a resolution. This is the paper trail. This is the mechanism by which you may make a decision this evening authorizing what had been on the previous 2 pages. So if you, in your deliberations, decide you want to accept this amendment and move it forward, one of you would move this resolution. So with that, Mr. Chair, thank you all for your patience. While I went through that, I wanted to make sure anyone listening at home understood the nature of this complicated proposal. So with that, we are happy to answer any questions that any of you may have.
Rich, go ahead.
So I think maybe just for clarity's sake, one, I think the bonuses are amazing and it's well deserved. And 2 things regarding that, I think it's good for us to make sure that everyone understands that that's $3,000 per staff member and not a $3,000 average, right? So no matter from top to bottom, each individual that works for TheRide is getting that $3,000 bonus, including Mr. Carpenter. And the second part they want to make is that in our finance committee, Mr. Carpenter did offer to forego that bonus, but if I remember correctly, the committee unanimously denied that and said, no, he well deserves that bonus just like the rest of the staff, because I know that he's put in a lot of sacrifices himself, put in a lot of long hours trying to make sure that we navigated, especially through this last year. So those are just the 2 things I wanted to really bring up. But I did have one question about the budgets. I assume there's a request for those 4 additional roles. I assume that we are also, are we going to do something about the CFO position? Is there an active search for a replacement? Is that already in the budget? I assume for that salary and the potential that we could end up to get someone, for instance, with John's caliber, because I don't know what he was getting paid, if we may have to actually pay more than we were paying him at the time.
Sure, thank you. With respect to the CFO, the Deputy CEO for Administration and Finance, that position is already in the budget. We do not need to add any more money to it. The search is ongoing, and I got my first crop of resumes earlier this week. So it takes time to find the best team members. So I fear not, this amendment will not have an effect on that search.
Okay, thanks.
Others? Mike?
First of all, I want to express my personal opinion. I think this new strategy about how to use the federal funds and how to defer spending the certain amounts of the tax dollars and putting them aside in a capital reserve is a wonderful plan, and I heartily endorse it. It's brilliant. I love it. As I think pretty much everybody on the board knows, we've had a capital budget every year with all of these, we hope, and we don't have any idea where any of the money is going to come from. Now we have an idea where some of it can come from, And not only that, having this reserve will allow us to leverage that dollars to help get other funds. So it's a wonderful strategy. I think it is just great. However, the only thing that we were asked to approve tonight is the specific budget amendment for 2021. It's laid out very clearly, but it really is contingent and is part of this overall strategy of how to utilize the federal funds. And by our approving the budget, in my mind, we are implicitly approving the overall strategy that has been outlined for 4 years. And I hope other people see it the same way. I think it's important that we do see it the same way. And I'm also wondering if, assuming that that is the case, should we say something explicit as a board regarding the overall plan and not just approve the budget? That's a question. I don't, maybe that's just a major thought that comes to my mind. Yeah, Matt.
Thank you. Glad to hear you're in support. There is sort of an implicit assumption that we would continue this strategy going forward, but I do want to clarify, you're not locked in. If for some reason, a year and a half from now, like every year, you as a board will be asked to approve another annual budget that will have this decision in it. And every year you can make that decision again. And if for some reason you ever felt the need to hit the abort button or to change the direction, we can do that at any time. So although this is a decision with ramifications, as you say, they're not, you're not locked in with the possible exception of the next 5 months.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of a further board statement besides adopting the budget, I'm not sure what that would look like. I'm trying to get my head around that, what we would need to say other than, fully supporting it on the record and voting for it, yes or no. I don't know, did you have something, Mike, that you were thinking about in terms of the tone or some kind of statement or message about this? The only reason I'm hesitating is the more we say about it, the more we open ourselves up to criticism for whatever it is we say. So I'm a little hesitant, but
Yeah,
go ahead.
I see both sides of that, and that's why I didn't have a specific recommendation there. But I think I just wanted to state it's certainly implicit in our approving the budget. And I certainly appreciate Matt's comments that, hey, we can change things tomorrow. And we only do have 5 more months of this year. But we've really pretty much committed to going down this path. Things can change though.
Yeah. Roger, then Jesse.
I just, as chair of the service committee, I want to echo Mike's comments that when we look at what we're going to want to do for service in the future, it's going to require a large capital expenditure. And instead of just saying, as we have been, boy, it would be great if we could do this and do this, but we don't know where the money is going to come from. By creating this capital reserve, we now are well on the way to be able to make long-range plans that are actually realistic financially.
Yep, we actually might be able to do some of the things we talked about at the retreat. So might be able to do some of that stuff. Jesse?
Yeah, I've said before, I'm very excited about this. And Mike, I had the same thought as you, wondering whether, because this budget is just for 1 year, whether we should try to, future proof it, try to put, this future funding into, into a lockbox, if you mind me quoting the 2000 election. But, as I thought about it, I think it seems, I think the statement of intent with this amendment is probably enough. And I would be worried about not having the flexibility to use the, that Matt would feel that he didn't have the flexibility to use these funds because we are still in some uncertain, we are still in an uncertain situation. And just as we have a policy against unfunded liabilities, I think I'm content with just the budget amendment as it is. But I'm incredibly excited about this. The idea of having capital funding to pay for the projects that we want is just not something I really thought. It was something I had kind of given up hope on 3 months ago. So this is incredibly exciting.
Any other board members want to weigh in? Any questions about any specific part of the plan? Mike?
I think it might be helpful to talk about one aspect that Matt really did highlight, but isn't technically an effect or in any way related to these federal funds. And that has to do with the operating reserve. The reason I'm bringing this up again, even though Matt stated it very well, there's been a lot of confusion at the board in the past about this operating reserve and how many months and so forth. And it hasn't been specifically reflected on our balance sheet. We've showed that nice graph that shows how many months we have and talked about what the dollars were, but it's confused a lot of people what it is and how you calculate it and so forth. I think it's really a great idea to now make it explicit on our balance sheet what that reserve is. But I just hope it doesn't confuse anybody, including the public. Going forward, it should be it will be less confusing, but we have to make the change, and I think it's a good time to do it.
Yep. Good points. Go ahead. Anybody else? Matt?
Thank you. Maybe one final thought for me, and it's mentioned only in passing in this briefing. The operating reserve, we will use, as we have in the past, also to backstop payroll. It's a cash float to meet expenses. So money coming and going out of that is, I think, appropriately handled by the CFO and staff. The insurance reserve, also very much a staff function. The capital reserve and the lockbox, Jesse reminded me with that term. And Al Gore used to be my senator, just to you're triggering me there, Jesse. I do think that the board may want to, if we approve this tonight and begin creating this capital reserve, the board may wish to place additional restrictions on the CEO and staff about our ability to move money in and out of the capital reserve. The other two reserves are very operational and day-to-day stuff, I think, well within staff's purview. You may want to consider having the board, frankly, be the only ones who can approve funding a project from the capital reserve, simply because it is a large pot of money, and good systems keep people above board, if you take my meaning. So if you do move forward in this direction, I might suggest that the Finance Committee also may want to ponder whether additional policy might be needed because of the emergence of this resource.
Yeah, Kathleen?
I'm so glad that Mr. Carpenter just brought that up, because in my mind, when we were talking about the capital reserve to be able to have money to fund projects that we so desperately want and desire for our ridership, in my mind, I thought that's what that capital reserve would be, that the expenditures would only be, the money would only be able to be used when approved by the board, that it wouldn't be able to float anywhere. I didn't have any idea that we didn't have a policy in place to take care of that. So I would highly recommend that we look at that as Mr. Carpenter has recommended, because it's important for transparency and it's important for the public to know that that money is safeguarded and it's there for their benefit for these capital projects that we want to produce in the future. And it's a one-time amazing opportunity. And I just would like to see it locked in as tightly as possible so that there can be no conjecture on anybody's part that that money could then be used in any other way but what we're intending it for, which is these capital projects. So thank you for bringing that up.
Anybody else? Oh, sorry, Jesse. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I know I need a less flesh tone background and better lighting.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. I think maybe that might accomplish some of what, or might alleviate some of the concerns that I think maybe Mike and I were having, that, you know, of protecting this money, maybe while still allowing us to have the flexibility in the short term. We have policies regarding at least the existence of the operating reserve. I think it makes complete sense to have policies governing the capital reserve. And of course, we haven't had a capital reserve, so we don't have those policies yet. Is that something that the finance committee, I feel like we would need to have those policies in place pretty quick. I don't want this, I wouldn't want this to be like it took us a long time to come up with the capital projects policies. Those took us a long time to discuss and approve. Can we come up with something a little bit quicker than that?
If I might interject, we will not get the first dose of property tax funding until, I want to say July. Caitlin, does that sound right? Okay,
Right.
so we will not even have anything in the capital reserve until at earliest July. So there is some time to consider the appropriate policy response.
Okay. Mike?
Yes, as chair of the finance committee, I will be very happy to take on that responsibility into the committee. And it will be on the agenda for our next meeting. I don't guarantee we'll have a policy at the end of that meeting. In fact, that would be too quick, I imagine, without any further discussion and thought. And obviously it would come back to the board for approval. But yes, I think it's very appropriate to have such a policy, and we will take that responsibility on. And I'm glad that Matt pointed out that it's not going to be funded for a few months, and it would be good to have the policy established by that time. We already do have restrictions on how capital can be spent, basically through the capital budgeting process. But I'm not aware of any policies that say that you can't transfer something from a capital reserve to, let's say, operations because you needed to do something, you had a hole in the budget or something. No, that's not something that we want to have happen without the board approving.
Yep. Okay. Anyone else? This sounds like a to-do for the finance committee, and we'll look into that. We have if there's no other questions, we have our own to-do, which is the resolution in front of us, Resolution 3, 2021. You'll see it there, which is asking for a vote and passage of the budget amendment as proposed in the packet. So can I have somebody move that into the record? Roger, seconded by Jesse. Any further discussion on it? All right, then I'll go through and just, ask for a yes, no vote according to the names I see in front of me. Roger,
Yes.
Kathleen,
Yes.
Jesse.
Yes.
It's like the fourth time you've shifted in the course of this meeting. You were like at the bottom right. Now you're in the top left, according to my screen. But Mike,
Yes.
Sue,
Yes.
Ryan,
Yes.
Rich,
Yes.
and I'm also a yes. So thank you, everybody. It passes unanimously. Never a hard decision when it comes to accepting more money. So thank you. All right. Closing out that one, then we'll move on to 4.2 and we'll move to the new 4.2, which is the service restoration public feedback. And I think Forrest is going to guide us through this. Go ahead, Forrest.
All right, good evening, everybody. I just want to provide you a quick recap of our March public stakeholder engagement process for the AUX service recovery proposal. So we have done quite a few public town hall meetings, lots of communication going out to the public, and then various stakeholder meetings, and there's staff engagement as well. Lots of efforts went into this whole process. I consider it was done very well. I do want to take the opportunity to thank staff who helped during the process, and particularly the community relations team, the whole department, and the staff from transportation operations and from planning innovation. Of course, we have public participation, and board members went to those public town halls. I remember seeing Kathleen at all those meetings, and Jesse most of those meetings, and Mike and Raymond participated one or two. And then I also want to thank Jesse and then Ryan for accommodating us for stakeholder meetings, meeting with township and the city, guest feedback. Of course, thanks to the writers and the public members for their feedback, and staff members for their feedback, and for your feedback as well. I think in total, we received over 300 different comments from 250-ish individuals. So that's why I consider that a success process. And then we got a lot of comments related to bringing my bus back. Of course, they probably didn't read a lot of details into the plan, but this is exactly the plan is proposing to do. I mean, largely, so which is good. I consider that's positive. And then we also received some positive feedback, and then just they're happy to see we're bringing back services. There are some root specific comments. We're working through them in the process to incorporate those feedback into the final plan. So we're making a few tweaks based on those feedback. And then as part of the analysis, I remember last meeting, Mr. Jim Morganson mentioned Title VI. Yes, Title VI is part of the process, and we've been working on that as well. We also, I would say, I want to remind you, we had a proposal to discontinue a few one local routes, express service and GoRide. We got very few comments about those fixed route services, except GoRide. I know Brian is going to talk more about GoRide tonight. But for the next steps, like I said, we're incorporating into those feedback into our final recommendation. So in June, I think in mid-June, we're going out to the public again, doing a similar process. Having public town hall meetings, communication, and stakeholder meetings. But unfortunately, we're going to accept all the feedback, but we're not going to be on time to make change for all service proposal. But we're going to take them into consideration for future planning, which is more like a January and April next year. So that's kind of a general process. So before I turn to Brian, any comments, any questions?
Any questions from the board? No. over 300 comments. I think that's positive in terms of engagement. So thank you for the update. Thank
No
you.
problem. I just want to add, if you do have, hear any more comments, let me know. Like I said, we may not be able to incorporate into the August service plan, but definitely we can consider that for the future planning. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's nothing more on that item, we'll move to the new 4.3, retreat follow-up on paratransit. And I think this is Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we'll start sharing. Hopefully this works the way intended. So is everybody seeing now the mobility management services, short-term, long-term? Okay, great. So at the board retreat, we had this discussion about mobility management and really got to the point of, so now what? And what we do over the next 2 to 5 years and what we do going out 25. Just to jog your memory a little bit, we talked first about how the service levels, we've had a historically high growth. Purchase transportation was the largest growth item in the budget year after year, especially following our 5Y TIP, where we greatly expanded the reach of our door-to-door services. And just a historical note that these numbers do include all of our contracted service, so AirRide at the time, and Vanpool, FlexRide, A-Ride, Holiday Ride, Night Ride, all of those items. And that's looking back into the past, but the future looked very similar. The data is from 2018, so it's out of date for 2020 and the pandemic, but still represents an unsustainable growth if the fundamental underlying issues were not changed. And so what can you change about this? Tonight, it's a short-term discussion talking about how we propose to address the immediate challenges. And then also, as Forrest had mentioned, the single greatest topic for feedback that we got was about GoldRide. And there was a lot of concern expressed both in the public and at the board level and at LAC about GoldRide. And so I'd like to talk to you this evening about a potential option for that for this fall. So in that short term, we've got 2 buckets where we can adjust things. We are grappling with immediate post-pandemic, where at the moment we can only address, we can only transport 1 household per trip. We still have the budget issues that we had pre-pandemic, and we have a millage coming up in the next year. So with 2 ways to address that between service level and eligibility tonight, I'd like to talk just about service levels as a budget issue, and really just trying to narrow down to something that can be covered in a reasonable amount of time, given that we're now 2.5 hours in. And so you'll recall this graph and putting these services in context. This diagram talks about how we really exceeded ADA minimums in several ways in both service level and eligibility. And even under the pandemic level of service, we have exceeded the ADA minimum, and that pandemic level is just temporary. Currently suspended are the larger 2 circles of same-day ADA and GoldRide. Because they were operated by the same company with the same fleet in prior years, there were not clear lines like you see in this diagram, but rather very fuzzy overlaps of what was required to be provided, what we provided, and this is the key, what was expected. We have an expectation, I think we have really developed of what service we will provide in normal times or in our usual level of service. However, to put this service into context, we need to adjust the diagram a little bit. GoldRide was available for seniors over 65, but without regard to their abilities or their income. It was also only available in Ann Arbor and in portions of Pittsfield Township. It was not available throughout the service area. This was at least inequitable, if not outright illegal. Now, GoldRide has been in existence for a long time. It's a community expectation, to be sure. And one of the questions, though, that came to mind for us as we were working through these problems was, should we continue to offer a subsidized taxi service to a population without regard to income or ability? It's entirely possible that we would have a marathon running 65-year-old millionaire as a resident of Ann Arbor. In fact, I'll bet I could argue that we more than likely have more than one. And should we be subsidizing the trips of that person with taxpayer dollars? And originally I thought it might have been Mike, but it may have also been Roger, who said, I'm that senior citizen. We shouldn't be subsidizing me. I don't mind riding the fixed routes for free, but we shouldn't be getting taxi service at a subsidy. The other thing that I would note is that same day ADA was available, but it was almost exclusively for people who did not use a mobility device. And if you used a wheelchair, you often could not get same day rides. This was both inequitable and a violation of federal requirements. So both problems that the paratransit study addressed for us with this statement, that most transit systems do allow for same-day service, but it's either on an as available basis or as a separate premium service and operated by private vendors. Which brings us to this slide, which I presented at the board retreat, where we talked about adjusting the diagram and allowing the ride to maintain a defined service level with predictable and somewhat controllable costs that meet the federal regulations, but also go somewhat beyond, because I think that is just an expectation of our community, is that people live and even move to our area because of the service levels that are available. So with premium services that could be completely separate, they could be provided at a different cost with a different level of subsidy or no subsidy at all, without confusion as to, well, is this a ride or is this one of your premium services? And here we get to the crux of the matter for the August service changes. And the reason, one of the reasons that GoldRide was recommended for permanent suspension from, permanently eliminating the sedan service was a lack of budget for it with the budget constraints, but also that the other way to adjust the cost of it is to adjust the fares, but the board has to set those fares. And we didn't have time really to develop a new fare model in consultation with the board in time to release the service recovery plan in March. If there's been one thing that's been true about the pandemic, is that it has been a hurry up and then wait, and then hurry up and then wait, and then, oh wait, we're changing everything. And we're going in a different direction. So that was something that we couldn't do. But I would say that given the feedback we have gotten from the public meetings and during the board committee meetings, that this longstanding service is really something that we should consider to continue to offer. How to do that is the question. I would submit to the board that it is vital, and I repeat, vital, that we separate these services. But could we look at a different way of doing this? So at the moment, we have our current proposal, which is just to eliminate GoldRide as a standalone demand response service. We could also come back to you and say, we'll just reinstate GoldRide unchanged. That still has equity issues and cost issues associated with it. And so tonight I would ask if you were interested in examining if staff could get together, if Forrest and I could work out a hybrid proposal, a third version that previously had not been proposed, due in part because it includes a fare adjustment. I would also propose that we have a service inclusive area so that we would involve all of, for example, all of our ADA area as opposed to just simply Ann Arbor itself, and continue to eliminate any kind of zone faring that we had done, for example, with TheRide, where it cost additional money to get to and from Ypsilanti. And that's actually the end of the presentation is just that question to the board. Is that something that you would entertain doing between now and hopefully August, so that we could propose bringing back TheRide in some hybrid format? And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions. I'll leave the presentation up just briefly in case anybody has specific questions about specific slides, but then I can drop the presentation so we can all see each other.
All right, thank you, Brian. Following up on this discussion that Brian's teed up for us, just weigh in. I don't want to put anybody on the spot and take a vote right now, but what are people's general appetites for choices 1, 2, and 3 there, I guess, is the place to start. Go ahead, Mike.
I think before I could even think about an answer to that, you said option 3, where you would reprice TheRide services, have to make the decision between now and August. Well, doesn't the decision, you need that a lot sooner than August, don't you? You're going to implement it in August. By when do you really need a decision from the board?
If you gave us the go-ahead, I would propose to come back next board meeting with a proposal on fares, that at least we would have some range of fares that we might charge, subject to a Title VI analysis and a budget line item for the board to consider at the next board meeting. I believe that would fall in line with the public meetings that we have planned for fare structure changes come June. Is what Forrest and I talked about earlier. And if I have any of that wrong, Forrest, I'm going to toss it over to you if I got any of that wrong. But I believe we have some fair public meetings on the books already for June, and so we would have details ready for you by next board meeting.
And if you did do that, that obviously takes some resources from you and some other people, but that would be okay. When I talk about resources, I mean time that you would have devoted to other things.
Oh, in terms of work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That wouldn't compromise other things.
Well, no, I wouldn't say so.
Okay.
As we have gotten this feedback and as we've had the board committee meetings, we've been talking as a staff during this entire time about what, okay, it's sounding like TheRide is an important factor. What would we do to address that? If we decided to, how would we do that? So I think a lot of that thought has already occurred as to what we might try to do. And frankly, this is what you pay us for, is to fix these kind of problems.
And pricing wise, you would perhaps be thinking about some kind of a break-even situation. Is that right?
Well, that's a possibility. It could be break even. It could be subsidize just low income. It could be subsidize everybody so that the sticker price doesn't shock the conscience.
Yeah, when I said break even, I meant for the ride. Yeah.
Oh, that would have to be part of it. I don't have costing for it yet. So figuring out what the cost would be and whether or not that would end up being something that we would then need to ask for the millage, or how exactly we go about doing it, is part of the work that would need done. And I wouldn't want to guess at that.
Yeah. Just speaking for myself, this is the first time I've heard of this. And so I'm going to have trouble without thinking about it more and maybe asking some more questions to come up with a strong opinion. But that's just me.
And I guess one clarification, Brian, are you proposing, if you come back in a month or so with a proposal to reprice or right price, are you also proposing to rescope the Gold Ride or change the parameters of it to justify the price, or is one going to follow the other, or is it just going to be kind of reframe the Gold Ride in general, or rescope the service itself, or is it just going to be a repricing thing?
So what I would ask for tonight is whether or not the board would be willing to hear a proposal that would include changed fares. That would be the only thing I'm asking for tonight is are you open to hearing that idea? Because the board has reserved fares and the fare structure for themselves. So we can put some work into what that fare structure would look like, what the service would look like, because there are questions about would we have same day service? Would we have what are the borders? What are the days of service? All of those.
I guess I'm thinking about, are we still going to subsidize millionaires is the question. I mean, are you proposing to eliminate that out of this when you right price this? I mean, is that going to be a component of it?
That would be part of my suggestion, yes. To subsidize really the folks that need it and not those that don't.
Okay, so in some way you would be talking about rescoping it, at least revising it in some way.
Right.
Okay, that's perfectly clear. Roger, then Kathleen.
Aren't we restricted on how much we can raise fares based on our base fare? I remember something from months ago that there's a limit to what we could charge.
So thank you for that question, because that actually tees up something very nicely. We can only charge double our standard fare for the fixed route bus for our ADA service. Any service that is separate and not associated with our paratransit, our complimentary paratransit service, we can price at whatever we would like. And as part of the strong recommendation for me to separate a ride from Gold Ride so that it is very clearly a premium service and not something associated with our obligations under ADA.
Thank you for that clarification. It helps.
Kathleen, go ahead.
So Brian, I just want to thank you for all of your hard work, you and Forrest, listening to the public, listening to the concerns of our seniors, of our LIC. I know it's so easy for us to hear that, you can get to any bus stop within a quarter of a mile. But when I think of all the senior centers that we have, when I think of all the places that our seniors need to go that don't have bus service. So you have the Depression Center, you have the Turner Geriatric Center, you have East Ann Arbor, you have Domino Farms. Those are not serviced by our buses. West Ann Arbor, yes, it is within a quarter of a mile of a bus stop, but there are no sidewalks. And so when I think of I know that we have seniors who are so much healthier than I am, and I'm not a senior, that can run marathons and do things. I think of our seniors that do need these services and do need to get to doctor's appointments, grocery, worship, and all of that. And while we've been in this pandemic, many of those services have been shut down. When the pandemic, as it eases up, they're going to need these services and they're going to need this opportunity. So I'm glad that you're thinking outside the box and thinking of ways to preserve a service that I believe is much needed. And I think it's one of the things that makes Ann Arbor an exemplary place for senior citizens to live. I think it's why people move here. I think it's why the AARP ranks us so highly, or has ranked us highly, in their accords. So I'm looking forward to hearing your proposal, but I just want our board members to really be mindful of, yes, there are people that probably equitably don't need our subsidized services, but we have so many who do, and we do need to service Ypsi and Ypsilanti Township. So thank you for that as well.
Thank you, Kathleen. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would just like to add in that I echo everything Kathleen just said. So thank you for your comments, Kathleen. There are so many places that just need service in the Ypsilanti Township area. I'm very considerate of, in fact, we just had a situation not long ago where buses were used in an emergency evac. Some of you may remember about a month and a half or so ago. So just mindful of those areas. So just want to kind of tag on to what Kathleen just said and just add mine 2 cents into that as well.
Thank you, Ryan. Anyone else? Sue?
Just a footnote. I know we've talked about it a couple of times, the lack of a sidewalk on Parkland Plaza for the West Ann Arbor Clinic. And I do believe that there are plans to put a sidewalk in. The university will be making a contribution to that. And I think the township, maybe it passed a millage. So I don't have all those details, but it is something that the township and the university have spent quite a bit of time on. And so I think we might see some improvements on mobility in that area.
Thank you. Jesse?
Yeah, I'm very curious and interested to hear, Brian, what you can come up with. I had been actually a bit shocked to find out that TheRide didn't serve Ypsilanti, that it only served a portion of our service area, including the to the jurisdictions. It wasn't serving two of the jurisdictions that are represented on this board. That was it never occurred to me that would be the case. So as you're working on this, I'm glad to hear that you're keeping in mind, the fiscal responsibility, but as well as the equitable service across our service area. And I look forward to hearing what you come up with.
Thank you, Jesse. Anybody else? It sounds like that's, unless somebody raises their hand or I see some body language to say otherwise, it sounds like the board is interested in speaking with one voice, that we are interested in hearing about a third way option here instead of just cancel or unchanged. So, feel free to go ahead and start that analysis, and we'll look forward to hearing about it next month, and look forward to that.
Great.
It sounds like there's something. Sounds like there's something on Latasha and Caitlin's plate when she gets back from vacation. So, all right. Anybody else? All right. If there's nothing else, then the next item is CEO report. And over to Matt.
Thank you, and thank you for that conversation, and thank you, Kathleen, for raising a lot of the issues. In the transit industry, we usually use the phrase, "We can't be all things to all people," but I'm increasingly preferring the policy governance terms, that the board's there to decide what we do for whom and at what cost. And this discussion, I think, really exemplifies the hard decisions sometimes that have to be made. When we make those decisions, what are we doing for whom specifically and at what cost? So Brian, well done with that presentation. It clearly resonated. So we will bring some more information back. Moving on to the CEO report, a couple of small clarifications or additions. So first of all, you may see more public information about the Y lot circulating. It's being openly discussed at the city. Forest's keeping tabs on it. There's nothing new to share with you this evening, but going forward, we will be able to have those conversations in public. So we're looking forward to that. Local Advisory Council did meet, the LAC. We did let them know that the board had adopted some new policy language, and let them know that, you know, very gently and very slowly, things will be coming forward to have the discussion. I met with the chair and vice chair of the LAC today and had a really good, really constructive conversation. I think they're very on board. And so we have a plan for going forward into the next meeting, and I'll be happy to talk to Kathleen about that, so she's up to speed. And then finally, the subject of earmarks was alluded to in the written report. I did send board members a follow-up message, I think last week, sort of outlining what had happened. A very interesting couple of weeks from a federal perspective. There are so many things happening now between the relief packages, earmarks, infrastructure bills, climate change bills. There's a lot of really big moving pieces. And at this point, very little of it is clear. The earmarks, we did put in earmarks, and just so we're all clear on that, for the forthcoming fiscal year of 2022, we did ask for consideration of Congresswoman Dingell money to continue the planning studies for the Ypsilanti Transit Center, and money for replacement of buses. And for the larger transportation reauthorization bill, we asked for the 50% federal match to the construction of the Ypsilanti Transit Center. That's the biggest ticket item at $8 million. And we asked for about $1.5 million in steady money for a bus garage. So a lot of this was influenced by the strange rules and priorities that were going on. And the whole thing really emerged so quickly that we went with, frankly, what was close at hand. And I didn't really have time to circle back with you as a board to really fully engage you in this discussion. So if earmarks are going to be a real thing again, and we're not going to be caught by surprise in the future, we're going to need to adjust a few things. One of which is now that it looks like we may have a capital reserve that can help us, I think our rolling 10-year capital plan that you will next see as part of the proposed budget for next year is going to have to include aspirational projects. So that, so frankly, that if I have an opportunity like this again, I don't have to guess at what I think everyone's priorities are. I can just look at the list and say, here's what the board approved. That's what I'm asking for. And then finally, there's so much happening in DC, and I got a lot of good things to say about our industry associations. Both APTA and the Bus Coalition are doing a really good job of keeping us informed. We may, however, want to consider in next year's budget whether TheRide may want to consider getting its own lobbyist in Washington, D.C. This is very common for transit industries or transit agencies. So it's something I'm pondering. I don't like to be caught flat-footed, as you know, and this one caught me by surprise. So don't be surprised if you see that in next year's budget. So with that one, I'm happy to sort of close off the CEO report, but if there are any questions about any of that, I'm happy to try to respond.
Any questions, comments on the report? Yeah, I mean, the lobbyist thing, from my point, the earmarks and the lobbyists and the whole discussion, I think, is a very interesting. We should have more discussion about that. I mean, just, you know, earmarks. He thought, I mean, that's such a. It sounds like such a relic from the past. So that's going to make a comeback, and we're going to return to kind of the old school politics of yesteryear. I mean, I gotta want to get my head around that and think about the best way. Yeah, lobbyists. Yeah, I got to think about that more. Maybe I'll have more thoughts to
It-
clear thoughts at the next governance committee meeting, but I gotta think about that a little bit.
we have time, and I was negligent. One more thing, I want to thank some of our board members for their help in this. Ryan Hunter and I had a great and very effective meeting with Congresswoman Dingell's staff. So I wanted to say thank you to Ryan for cracking the door open and coming with me. I thought that was a great team job. And Jesse and I had a very fast conversation with the city of Ypsilanti that I thought really was a bit of a breakthrough, frankly, with regards to discussing whether or not they would be interested in helping us get a hold of some land in the city. That happened much faster, but much easier than I expected. So my thanks to Jesse and Ryan.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, then we'll close off the section 4, move to section 5, emergent business. Any emergent business this evening? It's not on the agenda. If not, we'll move to section 6, closing items. On our topics for next meeting are the quarterly reports, as well as a monitoring report on 2.9 external relations. Any questions or anything else that I mean, it seems like we just did this 1 or 2 meetings ago, but any thought or chance or anything that will be discussed on budget? Any preliminary discussions on budget for FY 2022, 23?
I think the
At the next
focus,
meeting,
I think, well, just as a preview, I think most of the interesting discussions for the next year are going to happen in our capital budget rather than our operating budget, but there'll be more discussion about all.
Yeah, okay. Mike?
As I had said earlier tonight, the task force for ownership linkage plans to talk about ownership linkage at the next board meeting. So that should be topics for next meeting.
And I assume there'll be some follow-up from the retreat, Brian's follow-up report or other items from the retreat that, we want a progress report on. So it'll be up. Anybody else? All right, we'll close section 6.1 and then move to section 6.2, public comment. Again, if you want to address the board, you can do so for up to 3 minutes. Please state your name for the record and hit the raise hand icon on the screen or *9 on the phone to let Mr. Book know that you'd like to address the board.
Thank you, Chairman
Keith, do we have
Mahler.
anybody who wants to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Mahler. We have Ms. Michelle Barney. Ms. Barney, you've been unmuted.
Go ahead,
Hear
Michelle.
me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. There were a lot of things I intended to say, but I am so struck by this $3,000 bonus idea. I've been hearing all week on the news about different states where essential workers are not getting time off to get vaccine, they're not getting various kinds of help that they need, etc. I'm so happy about this bonus for those people because they deserve it so very, very much. Thank you for thinking of the ride's essential workers. They're essential to us. We need them, and they deserve everything you can give them. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Keith, do we have anybody else?
No, Mr. Chairman, we do not have anyone else.
All right. We'll close the public comment period and just remind you, section 6.3, there's a board assessment of the meeting in your packet. So please click that link and fill that out. And then 6.4 adjournment. Can I have somebody move to adjourn? Roger, seconded by Sue. I'll give it to Sue just because it's her last official act as a board member.
Thanks for everybody.
Thank you, Sue.
Thanks, Sue.
Yep. Be well.
I guess we officially have to go through the roll. So yes or no, Roger,
Yes.
Kathleen,
Yes.
Sue,
Yes.
Yes.
Mike, Jesse,
Yes.
Yes.
Ryan, Richard,
Yeah.
and I'm also a yes. So thank you, everybody. Happy trails, Sue. Take care,
Bye,
everybody. Have a good
Sue.
night.
Good
Bye,
luck,
Sue.
Sue.
Good night, everybody.
Take care.
Bye,
Thank
Sue.
you.